It's a Wednesday afternoon, and our first guest today, and this is good. If you want to call up, by the way, you'll have an opportunity to do that in just a sec. Her name is Sandra Reich. We spoke, I guess, about a month or so ago on the air. And now, Sandra, you came in today, so thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
You run the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression.
Yeah.
And you're doing this because we're just talking during the break. You originally are a clinical psychologist. What's your background?
Psychotherapist.
Okay.
In the background of anxiety and depression. That was my training. And through the years, the business just went through the roof because there was so much demand for treatment for anxiety. And I figured, why not open a clinic and offer it to more people? So we have offices in the West Island and in Montreal.
So who goes to one of these clinics, or who finds out about one of these clinics? Who sends you there?
Well, doctors do, but also just by going online. When people punch in help for anxiety in Montreal, our clinic will pop up. It's very important with anxiety to deal with a specialist. So you want to be dealing with someone who's trained specifically in those areas.
As opposed to just going to a regular psychologist or...
Yeah. I mean, psychologists and a whole bunch of practitioners are amazing. It's a bit like going to a GP as opposed to a specialist.
Okay. So I have a fear of something. Rational or irrational doesn't matter. When we talked about this last time, I think a lot of people just figured, you know what, I'm scared of whatever it is I am, and I'll live with it. They don't ever bother doing anything about it, and that's obviously not a good thing to do.
Well, it depends. If it's really not interfering with your life, then no problem. But if it's interfering, like you're starting to avoid things, the more you avoid things, the more the fear will increase. So that's not a good thing.
If you recognize that fear as being irrational, is that a step in getting rid of it, or is that just something you can sort of deal with because you say, look, I'm scared of, crossing a street in the middle of the street?
Yes.
So cross at the corner.
Yeah, but sometimes when we say it's irrational, we're almost like criticizing ourselves, like stop being so ridiculous. And actually, when you have anxiety, it's quite debilitating. It's scary. So the first step is, yes, of course it's irrational, but it's also understandable. There's a reason we have anxiety. Our sympathetic nervous system fires and we get like a false alarm in our body thinking we're in danger. We're just not in danger.
Right.
We think we're in danger. But our body is reacting as if we're in danger, so it's not crazy. By no means.
Is there if you had to go down a list of the top 5 things that people come to you with, anxieties that they come to you with, are there ones that are more common than others?
Yes, definitely. Social anxiety, people being very shy to speak publicly, speak to their friends, eat in restaurants is a big one. Driving phobia, huge one. We take people on the road on a regular basis who can't go on the highway. That interferes with your life. And the more you avoid it, the worse it gets. Anxiety also generalizes, it's important to know, which means that if you avoid one thing, most likely it's going to start to transfer to another thing. That's the problem. And that's why it's so good to treat, because it actually gets better.
And I mean, what's the process in treating it? How does it work? Someone shows up and said, I'm scared to go out in public. I don't like eating out in restaurants. So that's an irrational fear. Because why would you be scared to eat in a restaurant?
Well, usually that's called social anxiety, and usually people with social anxiety have grown up with very critical parents. So they constantly feel the attention is going to be on them and they're going to be judged. So they've learned that judgment is very scary to them. So there is some rationality to it. The problem is that we can overcome it and we don't have to live like that. So the treatment plan is we start them off by learning how to relax their body and deal with the anxiety. But ultimately, we do actually go to the restaurant with them. We will go that far. We'll go to the 11th degree because that's the best way to overcome anxiety.
To prove that nothing bad is going to happen eventually when you go to a restaurant.
Yes, because the brain is associative. So if you avoid something, if I avoid coming here today because I'm anxious, the next time I come here, it will be double hard. So that's not the good solution.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. As far as irrational fears, when we first talked about this, I said my mother has an irrational fear, for example, of going in elevators. She is frightened to go and will never go in by herself. If there's someone else and she has to go in, she will, but otherwise doesn't want to. And when I said that, Dan Spector, our producer, Dan said, you had the same fear for a while.
Oh, yeah. When I was a teenager, I would take the stairs everywhere I went. I remember, like, even if it was like the 6th floor, 8th floor, I would take up the stairs. I don't know.
And you don't know why that happened?
I think it was kind of like, first, like, a bit of a claustrophobic thing, like just being in there in the closed space, and the fear that it's going to stop and you're going to get stuck in the elevator. That used to really freak me out.
So is that irrational?
Yes and no. The common theme here is control. And when you're in an elevator, you don't have control at that moment to open the door, and that's what sends people into an anxious state. The truth is, to defend us all, who all have our different anxieties, is this world is very out of control. So what we do is we try to grasp onto control, and the more we grasp onto control, it's a bit like holding a bar of soap too tight. It starts to slip out of your hands. So when Dan was going through that with the elevator, there's a sense that he wasn't in control of what would happen in the elevator, and that's what scares people.
If you have one of these fears, irrational or otherwise, or you have, anxieties, give me a call, 790-0991. Sandra, you said if we have the time, we'll try to get to some of the callers out there today.
Sure.
So, yeah, if you have any rational fear, I think last time we had a gentleman call, what was it, Dan? Calling saying his wife didn't want to go out on the boat with him or something?
His wife was horrified deathly of boats.
Yeah.
And didn't want to go out on the boat.
And became more and more, as you're saying, it becomes bigger and bigger the less, or I guess the more time you don't treat it, the bigger the problem it becomes. So if you have any kind of these fears you'd like to have, Sandra sort of address, you can call 790-0991. So when you say you have a process, I come to you, let's say I have the social anxiety issue where I can't go to a restaurant. So you start by relaxing, whatever. How long is the process? I mean, is there a finite time from beginning to end?
The research shows us it's between 15 and 20 sessions with a standard deviation of 5, which means some people can do it in about 10 sessions, maybe even less, and some people stay longer. But it works like a charm. That's one of the reasons I like people to know about it, because anxiety is very, very treatable. There's no reason. The more you avoid it, the worse it gets. The more you treat it, the better it gets. And avoiding it just actually, as I said, will generalize to other problems. It starts with the restaurant. It will end up possibly with you not wanting to leave your house. And that's a problem.
Sure. There are a couple of others you could say, I mean, as far as, standard sort of problems?
Well, you'd be surprised. We get a lot of vomit phobia. We get a lot of that. Vomit phobia.
What is that?
People are afraid of vomit. That's a very common phobia.
Afraid of vomit?
Yes.
What does that mean?
They're terrified of the idea of vomiting or being around someone who vomits. It's a big one, a very common one. Yeah. So is blood phobia. That's a very big one, too.
It's scared at the sight of blood?
Yes. Yes. We've had eyeball phobia. We've had, of course, flying phobia. We've actually gotten a client on a plane, and by the time we were through with the treatment, they were actually flying the plane. It was a little commuter plane, and we got the pilot to work with us. That's the best way to overcome it, because you have to go beyond the fear. We go beyond it.
So if your fear is fear of flying, you can actually get through that with someone.
Absolutely.
Is there ever a thing where you can't get through? I mean, is your fear that great that you can never be cured?
There's never a fear that can't be cured unless you don't show up. Unless you don't show up, if you're not willing to go in, we go in small steps because we want it to be comfortable for people. But if we start doing it and you quit therapy at that point, then your fear is going to come right back.
We have some calls. Let's go to the phone. Ted's calling from RDP. Ted, what's your particular issue?
Yeah, hi, Sandra.
Hi.
My question is, I have a 12-year-old who has been diagnosed with having anxiety.
Okay.
The level of anxiety is not exactly known because it was diagnosed by a GP exactly, not a specialist, like you said.
Yep.
Now, he has fears of many things. One, he has, for example, if he'd be going to a soccer game, he'd get really, really nervous, get stomach aches before the game, not knowing what the outcome of the game will be. Going into a shopping mall, being in a store where it's crowded, many different little anxiety. School.
So this is your social anxiety routine, right? This is about being out of...
Yeah, exactly.
Great. I'm an amateur clinician now.
Yes, apparently.
So what do you do?
Well, we definitely start the same way. As we work with your son, and there's no question that we try to make it a fun experience. We laugh about it, not laughing at the fear, but slowly desensitizing your child to those fears. And ultimately, when we're working with a client, they will start to go, wow, I've got through that. And there's an incredible sense of accomplishment as you start to take it in small steps.
Is it different between children and adults? Easier, harder?
I think it's a little bit easier with children because the fear has not been cemented as long. But really, we've had as young as 4 years old, and we've had as old as 85 years old. No problem.
All right, Ted, thank you for the call. Let's go to Jim out in Point Claire. Jim, what's your issue here?
Hi. I was going to talk about one subject because my mother is petrified of cats, but my buddy John, he's afraid of bridges. He doesn't want to drive over bridges, and he's really petrified. Is that curable?
One of our most common issues, again, that has to do with control. You're going over a bridge, and there's that sense, what if you start to have a panic attack on the bridge? What if you don't know what to do? So a lot of it is also, on top of the experiential of taking you out, is to go through the what ifs. And here's a strategy I'll just, mention is you turn your what ifs into so what if. So if you have a panic attack on the bridge, what is the worst thing that could happen? You might have to stop your car. Yes, it could be a little bit embarrassing, but you will get through this. So we really, anxious people tend to go to worst case scenarios, and we want them to look at the worst case and see that it's survivable. And it is survivable.
So that's a fairly common one, this idea of a bridge. I nodded when I heard him say that because I remember this as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's the sense of control again.
Yeah. All right, Jim, thank you for the call.
Thank you.
3:45. We'll go to traffic. We'll come back. We'll take more of your calls with Sandra Reich from the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression. And, we haven't talked at all about depression,
right?
But I guess it's worth bringing up because it's becoming a bigger and bigger issue, it seems, every day. So we'll talk about that as well. Your call, 790-0991. An irrational fear, a fear, anxiety, anything you have. If you want to get some help, give us a call. We'll take your calls when we come back. 3:49, we're in conversation with Sandra Reich. She is the executive director of the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression. We've talked about a bunch of different types of anxieties, rational and irrational fears, but we haven't talked anything about depression. So where does that fit in on the scale?
Well, first of all, people don't always realize this, but depression is the first cousin of anxiety. Depression can be considered an anxiety disorder. So a lot of times, for example, if we reduce anxiety, sometimes depression comes up, and sometimes depression is just a different way of handling anxieties. It's kind of like shutting down. One thing that's interesting about depression is we know it's often anger turned inwards, and anxiety, as we were talking about on the break, is often repressed anger that hasn't been dealt with. So they are very similar. They do work hand in hand, and the treatment is slightly different because we're not doing an exposure treatment, which is what we were just talking about, but we want to get to the root of what's going on, and we definitely want to look at emotions in that. What's happening with the anger?
Okay, let's take some more calls. My lines are full here, 790-0991. Anxiety and depression. Do you have any irrational fears? Are you depressed? Don't understand why. Let's go to Mary. She's calling right now from St. Leonard. Mary, go ahead. You're on CJD.
Hi. It's my husband. The problem is there's a lot of problems I see. Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, there's a lot of problems, but one of them I'll mention is windows and airplanes. Okay, I didn't realize this at the beginning of our wedding 21 years ago, but he's afraid to open a window because germs will come in. And I see that it's been growing on my kids, and I don't like it. I don't know what to do, and there's many other things that my kids have let's say, caught the same disease kind of thing.
Yeah.
I was worried for a sec when you said windows and airplanes. I'm like, you really shouldn't open those windows. You just mean windows around the house? He's scared the germs will come in?
Yes,
okay.
Yes. And airplanes because something will always fall down on his head.
Okay.
So, and like I said, there's many other things, but there's too many to mention.
Well, one thing you said that I thought was very smart is anxiety is definitely contagious, so it's definitely going to affect the family, so that's a valid point. Overall, there is sometimes with anxiety, and we're talking about irrational or rational, there's always an element statistically of a possibility. So, for example, if you're afraid of germs, there's always a possibility that you could get sick. But what we look at is statistical probability. Do we want to live our lives on the possibility that we could get sick, or do we want to live our lives? So that would be one of the things we'd be working with him about, is that, I had a client many years ago who was terrified of food poisoning. I've had food poisoning. It's pretty awful. But the thing is, do you want to live your life on the probability that you're going to get food poisoning? It's statistically, it's not that lightly. So you want to live your life fully and deal with whatever happens. So that would be part of what we call cognitive restructuring we'd be doing with him, to sort of look at the probability of this happening and look at the price tag of the way he's living his life.
So very treatable.
Very treatable, incredibly treatable. I mean, we like to say we have a 95% success rate, and that's conservative, because as long as the client wants to get the help, it works.
Does your husband recognize he has an issue?
I would say he does, but he always keeps on admitting he's in denial. He doesn't want to admit that it's getting worse, and he doesn't want to admit that he has certain things. So, I mean, also about the kids, let's say. So it's really, really tough on me, and I'm just looking for some help.
Well, sometimes you brought up 2 points that are very important. One is the angle sometimes is to mention the kids, because as any good parent, I'm sure that is not a good thought for him to think that his kids are going to get the anxiety. And the other aspect is that sometimes the partner in a situation like that unwittingly might be enabling. So there are things that you also can do to make sure this doesn't continue, because sometimes what we do when we care about someone and they have anxiety is we try to make their lives easier. Bad strategy.
Okay. I got to take more calls. I suggest, Mary, if you'd like, Mary, it's called the Montreal. Can people go online to try to get some info on this? Where
Absolutely. It's www.helpforanxietydepression.com.
www.helpforanxietydepression.com. You couldn't get a longer name?
Couldn't get a long one. We tried.
Helpforanxietydepression.com. Okay. Mary, thank you. Let's go to Carolyn calling from DDO. Carolyn, go ahead. You're on CJD.
And hi to Sandra.
Hi.
I am a client of the Anxiety and Depression Clinic, and I just have to say that from my first visit, Sandra might know who I am. I'm a client of George's.
Yes.
And after the first visit, I had to meet Sandra because after the first visit, you have no idea. I was afraid to drive my car. I was very depressed, and I was told, go home and make a pot of coffee because I stopped making coffee. And Georgia told me, go home and make coffee even if you don't drink it. Watch TV. I had stopped watching TV, and I had stopped using my computer, all because my husband died 2.5 years ago. And I have made such progress, and I'm ever so grateful. I've gone 12 times now, and my life has changed. And it's thanks to Georgia and all that she has done for me.
Oh, that's a wonderful story.
That's so nice of you to call and say that.
But no, Sandra and Aaron, if somebody needs help, this is a place to go. Right. Because I was at the end of my rope, and I went there, and the people are so friendly. Oh my! I know almost everybody. So
that's great.
Yeah. So there's hope for everybody. I thought, Aaron, I thought there was no hope, but there certainly is.
How generous of you to call and say that.
Couldn't get
thank
much
you so
better
much.
endorsement than that. Carolyn, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. We have time for one final call here. Let's go to Chris, who's at NDG. Chris, go ahead. You're on CJD.
How are you guys doing today?
Good. Go ahead.
So I have a 7-year-old daughter who's got this phobia of small, round objects like buttons or coins.
Okay.
And that's one we can't get away from. I mean, we've worked with her a bit. That doesn't really freak her out as much as the small squishy balls that you'll find at the dollar store.
Really?
You know, like the soft rubber. They come in different shapes, that sort of thing. That will make her panic and scream and cower in the corner.
Sandra? I'm just curious. This sounds completely irrational.
Yes, but the thing is, we always have to come back to the fact that once the brain has an anxious response, the brain is very associative. So it could be anything. It could be me going, scratching my head. If I start to have an anxiety attack by doing that, my magical thinking is going to kick in and start to believe that if I just don't scratch my head, I'm going to be okay. So something like that has happened with these round objects, and she has started to believe that if she avoids them, she'll be okay. That is not true, but that is her brain strongly believes that. So the only way to treat that is to make sure we can prove to her without a doubt that that is not the case. It is not the round objects that are going to be the indicator of the anxiety. But it's literally like having a car accident on the DeKalb Expressway and all the cars are honking at you. And then every single time you get on the DeKalb Expressway, you get that anxious feeling. Right. It's associative. The brain remembers what has caused itself anxiety. And anxiety is very uncomfortable, although I do want to mention not dangerous.
Okay. Chris, thank you. I appreciate the call. As I said, if you want to get in touch, you can call or you can go online. It's helpforanxietydepression.com. We're out of time, and we didn't even get to talk about depression, so maybe we can have you come back next week or the week after or something. Sure. We'd be okay with that?
Yeah, absolutely.
If you want to know more, it's the Montreal Center for Anxiety and Depression. Outside of going online, people can call.
Yes, 514-777-4530.
Terrific. Sandra, thanks so much for coming in. Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break, 3:58. We'll be right back.